When I'm in the songs, I don't know the words, it's a song. Ariana Grande sings really high. I don't remember all the words. Something. I have way too much fun by myself and it shows. Hello, everybody. This is Blind Dates with Jay Walker, and I am your host, Jay Walker. And I'm with my beautiful guest today, Jay Walker. It's me. I have so much fun by myself. Okay. So I got ghosted this week. My Tinder just, didn't go through, and I guess I swiped to the left. I don't know. Um I did the Bumble and it didn't respond. I don't know. I'm trying to make jokes and it's not working. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't have a guest this week. And I decided that what is a better topic to talk about than me? Um, because every time I have an interview or I start a podcast or, interview for somebody else's podcast, the question is always like, how did you go blind? And I cannot even tell you how many times I've had to answer this question, whether it's on a podcast or in real life or to a doctor. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to just record myself telling the story. Save myself some work for the future. So strap in, grab yourself a snack, maybe a little bit of drink, maybe some tequila if you're of age. Because this is going to be a rocky one. And I'm going to start now by saying there's going to be a huge trigger warning for this episode. So if you have any issues revolving around medical trauma or gore, I guess, because I can't tell the story without, being a little bit graphic. And I'm gonna tell the details. I'm gonna tell the story. I'm not gonna go all the way into it because it's not super necessary. I'm gonna just give you the highlights. But it's important for people to know that, going blind for a lot of people isn't just going blind. It's going blind and then going blind again and again and again and again every time you open your eyes. And when sighted people or people with some sort of vision don't live in that world and don't wake up every day reminded of their identity, it's hard to appreciate, you know. So I want to tell my story so people can appreciate, what blind people go through when they go blind, when they start being blind, and when they are blind for a little bit and then for a long while. So once again, trigger warning, I'm going to tell the story of how I went blind. If this bothers you in any way, shape, or form, please do not watch this, because I will not hold back, because I have told the story so many times that the details barely bother me anymore. So we're going to start from the beginning. When I was a kid, I was pretty, sickly. I had a tendency to be in the hospital quite a bit. I was, from pretty much birth, it was a struggle. If you ask my mom, it was a rough one. Um, and what ended up happening is at age 2, I got HSP, which is basically a rash. At age 6, I got, well, actually, I'm going to go a little bit more into HSP. Right? Henschlag purpura. HSP? Is that what it's called? I might be wrong. I don't know. Henschlag purpura is basically an autoimmune disorder or autoimmune disease of some sort that causes some sort of rash to appear on like a child's skin. And one day I just started getting all these random bruises all over me, and everyone was like, "Where is CPS? Why does this kid have so many bruises?" And so my family took me to the hospital, and they were like, "Ooh, yeah, yikes." So that was kind of the beginning. And then at age 6, I got something called osteomyelitis, which is a bacteria that eats your bone. And I had it in my right tibia, and that ended up needing surgery, and that's a whole story. But wow, that's not why we're here today. I grew up very middle class, very normal. I was happy, I was content. I did a lot of activities with my family. Like we were very, very family oriented. We did activities every single day, whether it was drawing or, playing with food coloring and shaving cream on the table, or doing finger paints or playing outside or, doing something. Like we were always doing something with my family. I have 2 biological sisters, and um I'm the youngest, which shows. Um and I we had a lot of our family holidays were very intense. Our Christmases were very elaborate, our Easters were very competitive, our um Thanksgivings were very, family and very, very much traditional Thanksgiving, I guess is a way to say it. And Halloween, we went all out. What I'm trying to say here is like my family was my number one support system from day one. And um like I said, I have 2 biological older sisters, and my being the youngest, I was I was definitely a target. I mean, I have 2 older sisters. We're gonna fight. We're gonna yell at each other. We're gonna take stuff from each other. We're gonna scream and break each other's stuff. Um, and being the youngest, I was kind of at a disadvantage, being separated by 5 or 6 years. So, that kind of bled into my ability to be resilient as an adult. And because of that, my sisters taught me, the birds and the bees. They taught me makeup. They taught me, hello? Sorry, there was just a big bang. Um, they taught me clothes. They taught me like everything I need to know. And I just kind of, followed my sister's lead. All I wanted to be were my sisters. And when they went off to college, you know, it got a little harder to be a teenager because I didn't have the guidance I had before. And um I started getting sick pretty consistently until the age of 10. I usually had, whether it was after the osteomyelitis, I had pretty consistent bouts of ulcerative colitis, which is, when your colon is inflamed and it causes, bloody stool and, GI issues and all, lots of fun stuff. And I had that pretty consistently in February of every single year. And it got to the point that I dreaded February so badly that it was almost causing me to get sick. And it was just a vicious cycle. And um, by the time I was in middle school, I wasn't really getting sick all that much anymore. It was very odd that I'd even get like a cold. And I, you know, went day to day. I was very eccentric. I was very in your face about who I was, and I was very proud of that. And I had my close friends, and that was it. But, I still managed to be within arm's reach of pretty much everybody in my grade. I know everybody who, if you needed a tampon, if you needed ibuprofen, if you needed whatever, like Jay's got it in her locker, like go talk to her. And so that was my life. And then in July of 2017, I got sick again. Except this time I was in North Carolina, away from my family. I was visiting my aunt after a vacation, and I was living in her house for 2 weeks. And literally, probably by the end of day 4, I was having bloody stool, I was vomiting, I was severely sick. And by the end of week 2, I told her I couldn't do it anymore. I was vomiting blood. Um, I had woken up the night before and started vomiting, and when I went to go wake her up, she sat down next to me after cleaning out the trash can and was like, "There was blood in that." And I was like, "Oh, that's good. Are you not as concerned as I am? Because I'm pretty concerned about that." And so she ended up taking me to the emergency room the next day. They sent me home. My symptoms, were stable enough that all they needed to do was give me some medication and some fluids and call it a day. So that's exactly what they did. And they sent me home, even though I had the worst migraine I had ever had in my entire life. My nose was bleeding. At this point, it was really just pink snot, but it was still coming out of me. And I was very just sickly. I was just not doing well. And so they sent me home. And it was what, maybe 10 o'clock at night. And I was laying in bed, and after getting doses of Benadryl after Benadryl after Benadryl to try and relieve what we thought was just allergies from my nose and everything, my teeth started to hurt. And it started very, like, subtly. It was very, like, it almost felt like when you eat ice cream too fast and you get, like, your mouth freezes up. I can't remember what that's called. Like your teeth are too sensitive. That's what it's called. And that's what it felt like. And then gradually, it felt like, when you have dried paint on your hand or on your finger or something and you try to like move and it's all crusty and like it feels really sticky. That's kind of how the right side of my face felt. It was very, puffy, and it was kind of hard to move, like my mouth, my nose, my eye, like it was just, tight. And my nose was still gushing, gushing, gushing. And so I got up and went to the bathroom. And at this point, again, I'm going to remind everybody that this is going to be a trigger warning. So I go to the bathroom, and I look in the mirror and my face is just so swollen. Like my eye is like, it literally looks like I'm having an allergic reaction. And I'm like, oh my God. So I start doing everything I can to blow my nose, whether it's like just blowing out my nose or like sitting in the shower with hot steam, trying to do anything I could to maximize, the snot that came out, I guess. And nothing was working. And so at 14 years old, I, took a Snapchat video of myself and posted it to my story and was like, haha, I have allergies, ha 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 ha, ha, ha ha ha. And my sister's friend found that picture and sent it to my mom and said, "Hi, what the fuck is this? Why is her face like that?" So my mom was like, "Ah," and she called my aunt and was like, "Why does my child look like that? What is going on?" And my aunt was like, "She's fine. What do you mean?" And my aunt was like, "What do you mean?" Like, she hadn't seen me in a couple of hours, so she had no idea. So my mom's like, go check on her. So my aunt comes up the stairs, she comes in the bathroom, and I look at her, and she looks at me, and she goes, oh, and she goes, Stan, because that's the name of her husband. And she calls him, and they rush me to the car, they rush me into the emergency room. And I remember being in the emergency room, like being checked in, and um I was just pacing back and forth because I was in so much pain at this point. My face was just on fire. I felt like my nerve endings were like coming apart. It was awful. So they checked me in, they put me in a room, and they hooked me up to an IV and whatever, and they gave me some iodine fluid for a CT scan. And for whatever reason, the iodine fluid just reacted badly to my system, and I ended up having like a blackout moment, and I freaked out while I was in the CT scan. I don't remember this, but I freaked out, slapped a couple nurses, slapped the machine a couple of times, and then they pulled me out, and when I woke up I was 10 times more swollen, and the bright pink was now red that was coming from my nose. And so they put me in a different room, and this doctor came in and he was like, hi, I think we're going to admit you to the hospital. But the ambulance isn't going to be here for 24 hours. Because for whatever reason, the emergency room and the hospital were in different units. I digress. And so he leaves, and I'm sitting there, and my nose is to the point where they had to put actual tampons in my nose to stop the bleeding because it was so aggressive. And at this point, my aunt has called my mom, and she's like, hi, they're admitting her to the hospital. Like, I'm probably gonna need you to come down. My mom is already on a flight. She's already on her way. Uh, and so, um, the doctor comes back in less than an hour later, and his face is just like, oh, and he's like, all right, we're gonna get you into the ambulance now. I'm gonna call them. We're gonna do this now. And I was like, oh, great. That sounds good. I like that plan. Not thinking anything of it. And at this point, I'm still just taking selfies of myself like, haha, I got allergies, haha. And then when I got into the ambulance and they put the breathing mask on me, they took my phone away. So I could no longer look at myself. Because what I didn't know is I was starting to turn purple. I looked like the McDonald's character with all the purple fur. I looked like the bitch that turned into a blueberry. What's another blue character? I looked like a Smurf. That's blue, not purple, but close enough. Same color wheel. And um so they end up taking me to to the hospital. They take me to a room, and there's probably a dozen nurses and doctors swarming my bed and, putting needles in me and putting masks on me and doing this, doing that. And I was so confused because I didn't have my phone, so I couldn't even look at myself. I had no idea what I looked like. I just knew that I was very swollen. Like I couldn't really open my mouth anymore. My right eye was swollen shut. Like it was bad. And I remember like yelling out and going, "Hey, what is going on?" And like half of the staff stopped and turned to look at me. And they all just kind of looked at me and froze. Because none of them had the guts to tell me that I was going to die. And I remember them, doing a lot of stuff. And at one point, an immunologist came in, or the anesthesiologist came in, and he, gave me the mask and was like, okay, we're probably going to give you a port. So, because we can't really get an IV in you. So, we're going to give you a port in your chest. And I was like, okay, cool. He leaves, he comes back in less than 5 minutes later, and just the expression on his face. Like, it literally looked like he watched something explode. Like, he was in so much shock. of just the transformation I had gone through in the 5 minutes he had gone, because I was unrecognizable. I was bleeding from, like, my lips were so broken and bleeding, and like the necrotic tissue was beginning to take over my face, and I was hemorrhaging from all of my mucous membranes. And I remember at one point getting my period, and I was like, oh, odd timing, but okay. So I got off the bed, they changed the sheets, whatever, and I sat back on the bed, and then when I looked down again, it looked like I had had a miscarriage. And I was like, oh. And I think that's when I realized that something was wrong. Like, something was more wrong than what they were letting on. Because what they weren't telling me is that I was going into DEI, which means that my organs were all shutting down. And I was beginning to, like, I wasn't clotting any blood. I was just bleeding out, basically. And so, I was just horribly confused mostly. And then I was awake, and I remember not really being in a lot of pain. I was just really confused, and like eventually I kind of passed out and like didn't really know what was going on, but I was still conscious. Like, I was so they had given me drugs, I think. That's why I couldn't really feel anything, but um after some hours, I remember like just staring at the clock waiting for 4 o'clock to come by, because that's when my mom said she was going to be there, was 4 o'clock. And um so my mom comes in, and I don't really remember most of like our conversation or anything, but from her perspective, she's told me the story dozens of times of her walking into the room and seeing me like looking as though I had been crucified due to the gore and the just all the tubes and the position I was in. Like, my arms were out and my head was down, and it was really biblical, honestly. And so she was very calm, honestly. She was very much like, "Hey, how you doing?" Um, but the rest of that trip is mostly a blur. Not a lot really happened other than me trying to heal. And I remember going home, and like I felt like really relieved that I was out of the hospital, one, and that I was on my way home too. But I also remember like I had to wear a mask because my mouth and my chin and my part of my face was still really broken up and destroyed from all the necrotic tissue. And um I remember being like, wow, like my eyes look really good. Like, my skin looks really good. My hair looks really good, because they gave me the nutritional packets when I couldn't eat, and like I was only getting liquid nutrition for 14 days, and that's why my skin looked so nice. But I digress. Um so I lived life pretty normally after that. I, you know, went home, and for 16 months I was a normal high school student. And then in December, well, it's really November of 2018, I got sick again. I got ulcerative colitis again, and I was horribly ill for a very long period of time. And I, I remember on December 12th coming downstairs and looking at my mom and my sister and saying, "We need to go to the hospital. Something is wrong." And it wasn't something is wrong, I'm pooping blood. It was something is wrong, I think I'm gonna die today. And So my mom rushed me into the car. We went to the hospital and we pulled in and checked in. We checked in at 4:34 and I remember being behind a hospital curtain for 4 hours. They gave me an IV but didn't connect it to anything. My nurse was more concerned about getting my height and weight than she was about the fact that I was vomiting blood and couldn't stand up. Um, it was rough. It was rough. But hindsight is 2020. There's nothing they could have done or would have known that would have changed what happened. And I, at one point, remember going to the bathroom with my sister and I threw up and I threw up blood. And when I was washing my hands, they were really like calloused. Like they felt really rough. And my skin was very blotchy and I couldn't like press my thumbs to my palms anymore. And I was like, all right, that's weird. So I went back to the hospital room and sat down and noticed that the lights started to get really bright. Like it started to really hurt to look anywhere. So I just kept my eyes closed and like my head was like bobbing up and down, my sister told me, because I was like half unconscious, like falling apart. And then my teeth started to hurt. And I looked at my sister and I said, "It's happening again. It's happening again and it's going to kill me this time. I'm going to die today." And she was like, yikes. So my mom went and grabbed a doctor, having heard me say that. And by the time she came back in, I was mostly unconscious. So what, happens next is all from other people's perspectives. And again, I'm going to put in yet another trigger warning because this is going to be probably the worst part. Um, so she calls the doctor in. He looks at me. He sees how swollen I'm getting because I'm starting to get a rash on my face and, I'm unconscious and I'm swollen and all this stuff. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to go grab an ophthalmologist. So he runs and grabs a doctor, a beautiful dark-haired, blue-eyed man named Dr. Brass. Um, I digress. And so he comes in and he's a resident at this time. So he's still new. He's fresh off the shelf, little baby. Think of all of this as if it's happening on an episode of Grey's Anatomy, because this is exactly what it felt like. Just without all the sex. And so he comes in and the normal eye pressure for the average human is between 12 and 24. Um, that's like what it is on any given day at any given time, in between 12 and 24%. When he checked my eye pressures, he literally physically paled and checked them again, and then checked them again, and then checked them again, because my eye pressures were at 86, which is unheard of. And he was like, oh dear Lord. So this man shoots up, rips off his coat, rips off his tie, runs down the hallway, gets on the phone with another ophthalmologist, and is like, all right, two things are gonna happen. We're gonna relieve the pressure in your eye, and if that doesn't work, we're gonna do it again. And so we were like, cool, whatever. I'm unconscious. I don't know what's going on. So we are in the room. He's shaking, nervous, anxious, uncomfy, very just terrified because my eyeballs are popping out of their sockets like whack-a-moles. And that's not even a joke. I looked like Wile E. Coyote. And so my mom, who is a surgical technologist, looks at everybody in the room, looks at the doctor, and is like, all right, everybody get out. Get out, everybody get out. And if you were to know my mother, you would know that everybody in the room listened very quickly. She's from Jersey. Um, and so she grabs a clamp and she looks at the doctor and she says, "Okay, I'm gonna clamp her eye and you're gonna cut it." And he goes, "Cool." So they cut my one eye and the pressure goes down. But the pressure in the other eye goes all the way up. So it's like one side deflated, the other side went up. It was terrifying. And the other part of that is that when they cut open the sides of my eyes, they were expecting something to come out, like blood, fluid, something that was making me swell. But nothing came out but air. And I deflated like a balloon, and then I restarted swelling again. And so he was like, "All right, we got to go to level 2. We're going to have to take out her orbital bones." So the other surgeon comes in, rushes in, they brush me into surgery, and they take out my orbital bones, which are this tiny bones that are right next to your eyes, to relieve the pressure, and they tried their best. They certainly tried. But I was in a coma for 3 days. I was so swollen. It was unreal. I I can't even describe it. A, because I genuinely don't know what I looked like because, you know, I couldn't see from that point forward. But afterwards, like, part B is just because nobody has ever really sat down to describe to me what I looked like because it hurts too bad to relive, which is understandable. But so I was in and out of a coma for 3 days, and I was intubated, and on occasion I was told I would wake up and freak out because I was intubated and try to pull the tube out of my mouth until I was sedated again. And eventually, I woke up, everything was fine, dandy, happy duty. And then I went through a lot during that hospitalization. I'm not going to go into it because a lot of reasons, but I had a horrible colonoscopy experience, horrible MRI experience. And when they put my orbital bones back in my face, they didn't give me pain medication for 45 minutes. So I was sitting there literally unable to breathe. I was in so much pain for 45 minutes, even though it felt like 600 years. But I digress. And I, you know, I was in the hospital for 16 days. And it was funny to me because before they told me that I was blind, it never occurred to me that I would be blind. It never really crossed my mind like this was gonna last forever because I woke up and my eyes were just bugged out. And I remember asking like my sister or whomever and saying like, "Wow, did they dilate my eyes or something? Like, why can't I see?" And they were just like, "Yeah, like, well, we had to do some surgery on your eyes, but, well, they should come back, like, who knows?" And we were like, "Okay, cool." So, it's day 5 or 6 of being awake, and a bunch of nurses and doctors come into the room and sit me down with my entire family in the room, and everybody's already crying, and I'm like, "Oh god, I already know what's about to happen." I knew it. I knew it so deep in my chest. Like, I could hear it in my head, like, from my chest, like, "You're blind." And I just didn't wanna really believe it until somebody said it to me. And the social worker sat me down, and she was like, "We need to address the elephant in the room." And I was like, "That's an odd way to call me fat, but alright, cool." Um, and she goes, this isn't gonna go away. And I was like, what? I literally was I was in shock. I was like, what? You're a liar. No way. I'm being punked. Where's Ashton Kutcher? Bring out my mans. And I I remember like the first time I asked it was a question, and then the second time I said it, it was a statement. And I said, I'm fucking blind. I'm fucking blind. Question mark? Period. And then I said it again and again and again and again and again and again and again until I was screaming and I was yelling at them because all I wanted to say was, this is your fault. You did this to me. And somehow I had some sort of restraint and I didn't say that. But I kicked everybody out of my room because, side note, during my altercation with swelling, I had a a botched catheter put in. Like it was put in and pulled out and then put back in again. And because of that, it caused severe bacteria to grow in my bladder, and I had severe bladder stones for months. And so every time I peed, it felt like glass. It was the most excruciating thing on the planet. And so I kicked everybody out because I had to pee. And I sat on that commode and I put my little booty on that chair and I looked at everyone around me and I um dug deep. I literally took the biggest breath I could and I screamed as loud and as aggressively and as like gut-wrenchingly as I could. And then I was like, cool, I'm done. What's next? We going to the cafeteria? I want some chicken strips. Like, and my mom was crying, my sisters were crying, everybody was crying, and I just wasn't crying anymore. Because and I I realized then that if it wasn't supposed to happen to me, it wouldn't have happened. And I looked at my mom and I remember saying, if, I'm going to be blind in 20 minutes and I'm going to be blind in 20 years. So what is the point of sitting around and being sad about it? Because nothing is going to change. And I still live by that. And it was the wisest I've ever been. And I honestly chalked that up to the oxycodone. But I remember looking like at my sisters and just being like, all right, so when are we going to go to Costco so I can swindle some free samples? Because I'm hungry. And like that was the beginning of my comedic career. Like immediately self-deprecating. Immediately I was over it. I was like, all right, cool, let's make this into a meme. Because it was the first time since I'd been in the hospital I finally felt like I had an answer. Like this horrible thing had happened to me and nobody knew why and blah 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 blah. And every day I was guessing if I was ever going to see again. And when they finally told me, I think I was finally just relieved I didn't have to worry about if it was yes or no anymore. And I, I now know that this is all just a form of delayed grieving, which we'll get to. But in the moment, it was great because most people, when they talk about their first moments of being blind, they talk about just hopelessness and not knowing what to do and being afraid and terrified. And I just wasn't, because for the first time in my life, I felt like I actually had a purpose and a plan and a step forward I could go because I knew that I wanted to help people. because I knew that my situation was so unique, but I knew that there were other people that were doing the same thing as me, like that were going through the same issues that I was going through and needed guidance. So I wanted to be, whether it was a public speaker or a life coach or a counselor or whatever it was, I wanted to help people. And I realized that then, 15 seconds after being told I was going to be blind forever. And um it was, it was a rough transition, but like in all of my hope, in all of my excitement, I didn't really stop to think about how difficult being blind was actually going to be. Um, it never really crossed my mind. And the day I got out of the hospital, I was just so excited because we were sitting in the car, driving home, singing Sweetener by Ariana Grande. Um, and I wish I could understand exactly what she was saying, but she sings so high pitched. I love her, but geez. But we were singing along and the lyrics were just resonating so well. And I just remember crying. And nobody in the car knew I was crying, but I was sobbing because the first time in 16 days, I spent Christmas in the hospital. I was away from my dog for 16 days, from my friends, from my home, from my bed. I was finally free. And I could walk and run and scream and sing and, be naked in my room and be around my dog and like do whatever I wanted to do and not have, doctors around me, needles in me, people waking me up at 3 a.m. to check my vitals. Like, I was so excited. And then I stepped out of the car and was like, ooh, how am I supposed to get to the door? How am I supposed to get up the steps? How am I supposed to make myself a snack? Or go to the bathroom? Or wash my face? Or brush my teeth? Or do any of that stuff? And then the grief hit. Because I realized in that moment that I knew nothing. I felt like a toddler. I knew absolutely nothing about being blind. I knew absolutely nothing about what it was like to be disabled or to even have any sort of vision problems. I didn't even wear glasses before I went blind. And it was like I had been picked up in a tornado and thrown across the country, upside down, backwards, inside out, with my eyes closed and my mouth sewn shut. Like, it was just such a complete 360, 180, 100,000 degree turn. And I was so ignorant and naive to everything. And it was terrifying. And in February of that year, I went back to school. I went blind in December, went back to school in February, and at this point in time, we still don't really know why I swelled. Um, we understand that I went blind because I swelled, but we don't understand why I swelled in the first place. And so we've gone to the Mayo Clinic, we've gone to NIH, we've gone to all these places, and nobody has any answers for us. And so I decide that I'm just going to live normally until someone can give me an answer. And so I go back to school and I have my first mobility practice. Um, I had my first mobility practice and walked up and down the hallways with a cane from Party City because I didn't even have a cane yet. And realized that, like, oh shit, this is gonna suck. Oh, this is gonna suck. And I fell really hard into depression, like real bad. You know, went probably as far as you can without actually committing the deed of suicide. And I, you know, it was just so hard to live my life and be reminded of all the things I couldn't do anymore. Because, I remember coming home and touching my corsage from homecoming and knowing I could, never enjoy a dance the same way again, which isn't necessarily true, but I didn't know that then. And I remember purging all of my books. I had hundreds, probably like 200 books, and I gave them all away, except for like my Harry Potter books and a couple really important books to me, and the rest I gave to a library. And I gave away all my makeup because I thought I'd never be able to do it again. Gave away all my stuff. And it was a rough transition. And then I went, you know, I went back to public school and things had definitely changed. I had gone from being this very eccentric, very out there, very personable, um, very much the person people wanted to be around to the person people feared. And when people saw me walking down the hallway, like it parted like the damn Red Seas rather than people, swarming around me and being like, hey, what are you doing for lunch? What are you doing for after school? What are you doing this? And I mean, there was one side of it. There were really two sides. There was one side of people making, wristbands that say, what would Jay Walker do? And like selling them and giving the proceeds to my family. And then other people selling t-shirts with my face on them and giving them the proceeds to my family. And like people lining up to help my family, with dinner every night. And, that part of it was amazing. And, I had a best friend that completely abandoned me, completely 100% dropped out of my life. And the people that were there for me were the boys that did all the drugs in school. They were the ones that came to my house every day and like helped me clean my room, helped me just sat with me and watched me, do whatever. And, the boys that were stoners that I didn't know very well were the ones that were there to help me. And I think what that goes to show is that you will find support in places that you've never expected. And I found it in drug addicts. Um, they're all great kids. They're all great people even to this day, but yeah, and it was it was very much like people didn't know how to approach me anymore. They didn't know how to talk to me. They didn't know what was okay to say and what wasn't okay to say. Like when people would say, "Oh, good to see you again," they'd just like hesitate. And I'm like, "You can say the word see. Like you can talk about being able to see. It's okay." And so, socially it was a hard transition, but also physically, you know, I had to teach myself as much as, I was going to the blind school and learning Braille and learning, I call it the blind school, but it's the Kansas State School for the Blind is where I went. And, um, I learned Braille, I learned mobility skills, I learned technology, I learned daily living, along with just like math and English and like stuff like that. But I, really didn't start the process of learning and growing until May of 2019, so 6 months after I went blind. And it was because of a white man. And I never thought I'd say those words. But yes, I was in a meeting with my IEP director and my, you know, the school officials and all those people, and they said, "We don't think you're going to graduate until you're 20. You're in the hospital all the time. You don't come to school. You're depressed. Like, you don't do your work. Like, what? You're not going to graduate until you're 20." And I said, "No, I will not be the 20-year-old college or high school student." And so I got my act together. I took 13 classes my junior year, most of them online, so I could actually do it, and um, learned mobility best I could, learned Braille in a year and a half, um, did, every day I was working on something new. Every day I dedicated my time and my energy to learning and getting better at doing something, whether it was cooking, whether it was cleaning, whether it was technology, Braille, mobility, or walking the dog, or shaving my legs, or decorating my room, or reorganizing my clothes, or doing something that would benefit me in some way, shape, or form. Because I realized that anytime I sat still, that was when I started to think about all the bad stuff. And I was like, all right, not doing that. So I busied myself with everything else. And I realized at age 16, when I went blind, that I only had 2 years left to learn everything I needed to know about being blind before I was on my own. And because of that dedication and because of the drive that I had and the willingness to not give up, really, and just wanting more than just living in my parents' basement is what made me learn all the things I needed to learn. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't Helen Keller when I was, you know, that age. I was still bumping into walls and, falling downstairs and all the stuff. Like, I wasn't an expert, but I knew enough. And I went to college, and it was the hardest transition I'd ever had. Um, I struggled greatly transitioning to college with in regards to swelling just constantly all the time. We still didn't know why I was swelling all the time. And we finally found medications that worked, but it was a daily injection with, a syringe. I had to give myself a needle every single day, and it was awful. Sometimes twice a day. And um on occasion, I, would get lost when I was going to class, and it was just a nightmare, but I made the most of it. And you know what? 3 years later, I'm still in college. And, you know, debatably, I've had the best couple of years of my life in college. Being independent, being free, living on my own, learning all these things. And I didn't really know what I didn't know until I didn't know it, if that makes any sense. I didn't know that I didn't know things until I was faced with the fact that I didn't know it. And I was like, oh, I gotta learn. So I learned things very quickly on my feet. And um, then I stopped needing to learn. I knew as much as I needed to know, whether it was about mobility or Braille or anything, and I was done surviving, and it was time for me to live. And I realized I did not know how to do that. And I became horribly depressed. I was um just February of 2023, I was in my new apartment, couldn't go to class, couldn't go to work, couldn't leave my apartment because I had horrible agoraphobia. Um, I was dissociating pretty regularly and forgetting who I was, forgetting my own name. I was having panic attacks on the daily. Pretty much anytime I thought about going to school or leaving my house or doing anything other than being asleep. And you know, I made some unsmart decisions throughout my time and, stuff happens. But after deciding for myself that I didn't want to live like that, it wasn't anybody else telling me to do it. It was myself saying, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. I found a psychiatrist, got on some meds. Now we're living. And it is currently March of 2024. And um it's March of 2024. And there's a lot of things I wish I would have known when I first went blind. Like, not necessarily like, it's not the end of the world and it's life gets better and like all that stuff, but I wish I would have known that people are going to lie to you. I wish I would have known that people are going to pretend to be your friend because they're scared to to hurt your feelings. I wish I would have known that blind people are still capable of being in love and having relationships. I wish someone would have told me that, you know, the world isn't an accessible place, but you have the ability to make it work. I wish someone would have told me that it wasn't always hopeless and that it would get better and that, you know, one day you wouldn't even notice that you were blind. Because in the beginning, every day I woke up and was like, oh shit, still blind. But now every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm awake. And I don't even notice anymore. I don't even really notice until it comes to a point where I like drop something or I'm like, ah, dang it. Wish I could see. But there are, there's one thing that, funny enough, my ex-boyfriend told me this. Um, but I think it's honestly really good advice and I'm gonna live by it every day because it's so true. Um, Trauma and the things that happen to you and everything in your life, whether it's a job or um, a hobby or a pet or a disability or trauma or whatever it is, are pillars. And these pillars hold up the ceiling that is you. And each pillar can be a different size depending on how important it is to you. So if your job is really big to you, then maybe your job is a bigger pillar than, say, your family or, say, your pet. If the other two are bigger than your job, then maybe those two are bigger than that. But trauma is also a pillar. And it is up to you to decide how big or small that pillar is. It is up to you to decide how much of your life is dedicated to your trauma. And every day you can work to make that pillar smaller until one day it's not even a pillar and it's just a little decoration in the corner. It's like, haha, I'm the reason you're funny. But, you know, I'm writing a book currently. Um, and I think I'm just gonna call it All the Things I Wish I Would Have Known or something along those lines. I don't really have a title for it yet. I'm still working on that, but it's all the things I wish I would have known when I was blind, when I went blind. All the things that I just said. And, I am really hoping that people will read that one day and be like, oh, this is really good advice now that I am a blind person. Now I know all this stuff and I am not starting at the bare bottoms. But I am also currently today a college student. I'm a junior in college and I'm going, looking into master's degrees to become a family and relationship counselor. with a certification in sex therapy and a life coaching certification. I have a cat. Her name is Loki. I love her. She's everything to me. And that's it. You know, I'm the author of a trilogy series called Pestilence, um, about a man who's surviving in the wilderness during the zombie apocalypse with his 13-year-old or with his 11-year-old brother. Um, and there's a lot more to that, but that's a whole other episode. But life's good. And I guess if there's one thing you can learn from my story and how I went blind, it's that you can't hold guilt to people or hold blame on people when they didn't know things. Like, hindsight is 2020 for a reason. And every day, it took a really long time for me to snap out of my, horrible depressive grief. And the thing that finally made me snap out of it was realizing that those doctors knew just as much as I did when I went in that hospital. They had no idea I had the disorder I had. They had no idea that pushing 1,000 milligrams of steroids into me wouldn't work. They had no idea that Benadryl wouldn't work. They had no idea that epinephrine wouldn't work. They had no idea. And I had no idea. So I can't hold it against them for causing me to go blind because they didn't know. And the sooner you take the blame away from everyone but the universe, your life gets a lot easier. I mean, your life will get a lot easier when you stop producing blame and holding guilt and holding grudges. And that's all I gotta say. So, this has been Blind Dates with Jay Walker. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it if you've made it to this point. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to reach out at blinddatesjw@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's the_real_blind. Wait, no, that's not it. It's the_real_J_Walker. And that's Instagram, and you can also find us on Facebook at Blind Dates with Jay Walker. The with is a W with a slash because I am too lazy to write out the whole word. So please feel free to follow us on Facebook. It would be wonderful if you would. All right, this has been Blind Dates.